Hello there! Today we're going to unpack the model of economic development through the eyes of one of history's most controversial thinkers, Karl Marx. We'll be digging into the core ideas from his massive work, Das Kapital. Let's get right into it.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this in 5 parts. We'll start by getting to know Marx, then we'll uncover what he called capitalism's secret fuel, explore its fatal flaw, and see why he predicted it would all come crashing down. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1. Who exactly was Karl Marx, and why on earth are his ideas still sparking so much debate today?
You know, the famous economist Joseph Schumpeter put it pretty bluntly. He said Marxism is basically a religion. For its true believers, disagreeing isn't just being wrong, it's practically a sin. That really gives you a sense of just how powerful and all-encompassing his ideas were.
The absolute bedrock of Marx's entire worldview is this idea: the materialistic interpretation of history. It sounds complicated, but the concept is simple. He argued that all of history, every war, every revolution, every big event, it's all driven by one thing: the ongoing economic fight between classes. Basically, the haves versus the have-nots.
Now, let's get to the heart of the matter in our second section. What is it that actually powers the whole capitalist machine? What's the engine that keeps it going?
The answer, according to Marx, is something called surplus value.
So what is it?
Well, think of it as the unpaid labor of a worker. It's all the value they create after they've already earned their wage for the day.
Let's make that real. Say a worker has a 10-hour shift, but in just the first 6 hours, they've already produced enough value to cover their day's pay. So, what happens to the value they create in those last 4 hours? That, right there, is the capitalist's profit. That's the surplus value. Marx laid this out in a simple formula. A capitalist starts with some money. Let's call it M. They use that money to buy what they need: labor, machines, materials, to create a commodity, or C. Then they sell that commodity for more money, which we'll call M prime. And here's the crucial part. That M prime at the end has to be greater than the original M. The difference between the two, you guessed it, that's the surplus value. For Marx, the entire goal of capitalism is just to make that gap as wide as possible.
But here's the twist. Marx argues that this constant drive for more and more profit, the very thing that makes capitalism so powerful, is also its greatest weakness, its fatal flaw. Let's see how. To get this, we have to understand that Marx split capital into 2 types. First, you've got constant capital. That's the money for machines, buildings, raw materials. Then you have variable capital. That's the money for workers' wages. And here's his big claim. Only variable capital, the human labor, actually creates new value. So if you're a capitalist trying to maximize profit, what do? You bring in more machines, right? You automate. You replace workers to become more efficient. This means your constant capital goes up and your variable capital goes down. Marx called this a change in the organic composition of capital. This has a couple of massive consequences. The first one, you create a huge pool of unemployed people, what Marx grimly called the industrial reserve army. With so many people desperate for work, it keeps wages for everyone else incredibly low. And the second consequence is the real kicker. It's called the falling rate of profit. Think about it. If Marx is right, and profit only comes from human labor, what happens when you replace humans with machines? The overall rate of profit across the whole system has to, inevitably, go down. This falling rate of profit, according to Marx, traps capitalism in a death spiral, a vicious cycle that he believed would absolutely lead to its final collapse. Let's trace how he thought this would happen. He saw it as a repeating pattern. First, there's a boom. Everyone's investing, profits are great. But then comes the contradiction. Competition forces more automation, which means fewer workers. This leads to a crisis. Profits fall, and the now poorer workers can't afford to buy all the stuff being made. The system collapses into a depression. Eventually, things get so cheap that investment starts up again for a recovery, and the whole cycle begins again. Only this time, Marx said, the crisis would be even worse. So what's the root cause of all this chaos? For Marx, it was crystal clear. Every single economic crisis boils down to one simple fact: the poverty and limited buying power of the ordinary people. You just can't keep selling more and more stuff to people who have less and less money. And this is the end game he predicted. The working class, the proletariat, would eventually get pushed so far that they would rise up and overthrow the entire system.
They would establish what he called the dictatorship of the proletariat, and socialism would replace capitalism. That was his prophecy. So the billion-dollar question, was Marx right? Was he a prophet who saw the future, or did his theory just completely miss the mark? In our last section, let's look at the criticisms and what's left of his legacy. While critics have a pretty long list, they point out that, hey, the middle class didn't disappear. In most capitalist countries, it actually grew. Real wages for workers have generally gone up, not down. Technology often ends up creating new kinds of jobs. And maybe most importantly, capitalism proved to be way more flexible than he thought, adapting with things like regulations and democratic reforms. But even with all those criticisms, you can't just write Marx off. Many of his core ideas are still central to how we talk about economics. The idea that accumulating capital is key to growth, that's mainstream. That profits are both the driver and a potential weakness of the system, for sure. And his prediction of boom and bust cycles, well, we've certainly seen plenty of those. And that leaves us with a final question to chew on. In our world today, with rising inequality and economic crises that keep popping up, are the questions that Marx raised still relevant? You might not agree with his answers, but it's hard to argue that his questions don't still hit close to home. Something to think about.